want to give my bit on Apple hate. And certainly there is a whole lot of it going around, and vice versa. A lot of hate coming out of the supposed Apple fanboys to whom else. And let's be honest, Apple is quite a lightning rod within the whole tech atmosphere, bubble, ecosystem, whatever you want to call it. For me, when I was an Apple user, and we're talking about a long time ago, not as long as some of my viewers, but I started out in the early 90s and even owned a couple of the clones from Power Computing. Back then, oh, if you're Apple, you were gay. Stuff like that. Got to get with what's upcoming and new with Windows and this, and oh, how can you like that kind of product? Of course, later on, the gay assaults also, they got more frequent. Quite frankly, I don't know how that has any relevance to a product's quality, no matter what it may be. Nonetheless, it's one of the things in that I guess it's not cool enough to own an Apple product. But then that is then used as the argument to attack Apple fans, Apple users, and that it is a perceived elitism of being the epitome of cool. So, who knows how, and how do you argue that, really? Now, honestly, I get lots of PMs and questions posed to me. Well, oh, I thought you were an Apple fan, or I thought you were an Apple user. Why do you criticize Apple here? Or why are you making these statements and things? First and foremost, I believe that I have a sufficient amount of videos to state my positions on OS X and Apple products, using what I feel is the strongest points, that being within technology. Try to shy away as best I can from sound bites or marketing ploys like magical or what have you. I think technology, once you understand it, speaks for itself. And once you have that knowledge, you as a consumer can make a better decision. If I were just another vlogger, blogger, YouTuber, whatever you want to say, that simply repeated a party line, no matter if it was Microsoft, Apple, whoever, I find that you have a hard time lending credibility to something being stated. Most of the time people are interested in a black and white situation, saying, well, hey, I've got this and I'm better than you because I have this, or vice versa. In either situation, my opinion will always be to try to maintain credibility as best as possible and just speak the truth to what technology holds. After all, I think the bottom line to most geeks, reviewers, people interested in technology, is that their interest is there to appreciate it. Now, sure, to those of you who post questions to me, I have many criticisms of Apple, but I wouldn't be an honest person if I didn't state them. A great example, which happened a couple years ago, was that, well, MMIO and being able to change the memory address maps was beginning to get deployed by Apple. And then it was touted as, oh, well, this is such a cool technology and this is why Apple's better than Microsoft. When in the end, it was an Intel technology that finally allowed the Intel-based Macs to be able to use the mapped or changing memory mapping. But versus Windows, which already had a full 64-bit system, didn't need to do such a thing. But it was still branded as something magical and new, so on and so forth. Things like where I had a statement posed to me about, well, what are you talking about iAds? Well, Apple has great marketing, and I can't take that away from them. But if the technology is such that we want to call something magical, and the iAds question that was posed to me, in stating, well, oh, it can do a layer here and it can go away, versus, well, that ability wasn't there before because the task switching was not made available in the iPhone previously until Apple decided to give it, versus another mobile platform like WebOS or something where you could do task switching and you could have concurrency, and therefore the statement by Jobs about, oh, it quit the application, and where I did state that Apple had no one else but to blame themselves, is a technology situation that was created by Apple and that they have since rectified. And then I have gotten a lot of heat about the whole Adobe position. Again, I'll use the same statements in saying, if I'm not honest with my viewers, then what's the point of even doing videos? A lot of the technological complaints in that letter I felt were unnecessary, because a lot of times it is the pot calling the kettle black, and it is completely sufficient to tell Adobe to get off their arse and produce a mobile version of Flash that everybody can use. That's completely and utterly a succinct and solid point. Of course, I get many people that confuse my stance on saying, hey, I agree with Apple not having Flash, to, oh, well, about the third-party toolkit. Of course, there's a lot of the pot calling the kettle black there. I don't know if anybody remembers when the iPhone first came out, native apps weren't even allowed for the sake of harmony and security of the system. Every app had to be written through and published through Safari. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And it was preached as such as the end-all, be-all solution. This is a very good solution. Of course, Apple changed its mind, and now we have native apps. It's the same thing. It's why we have debate. It's why there are resistance to things or support for things. And I'll bet maybe Apple does change its mind again on third-party solutions, or maybe Adobe creates a kick-butt mobile Flash version and then Apple accepts it. Or maybe not. Or maybe they just run the whole HTML5 alternative and they run the Flash option as well, giving consumers more choice. Then I think a lot of the Apple hate comes upon Apple being closed. I will stand by Apple and say they are one of the most open companies that I know about, short of everyone working within the Open GPL license, copyleft license. Apple works within most of its open code within BSD licenses or Apache-like licenses or their own Apple open license that they have. That you can go to the Apple website and open source, and they got tons and tons of things, specifications that are out there. They push open standards, which, yes, may benefit them through patents or agreements or codecs, what have you. And that create a lot of confusion of, well, what's open source and an open standard, and who is beneficiary here, and all this other stuff that goes along with those lines. Do we have to rehash a lot of the criticism that I have for Microsoft and other companies who have been supremely closed to much of the technology ecosystem out there? So much so that, like an example I use with Java, where Microsoft had to pay out the sun for their whole infringements within Java, and eventually we have the whole Microsoft flavor, J++. There's always a Microsoft flavor. There's always a Microsoft flavor of everything. They've got to put their stamp on it. Now, I will agree also that Apple likes to run a tight ship. I think Steve Jobs is always quoted saying, funniest ship that leaks from the top. Things like that. I support Apple in trying to keep an ecosystem that they perceive will deliver the best customer experience. But I'm also very critical in saying, well, there's always limits to that. We don't want to repeat a lot of the protectionist measures that suffocated a lot of the Apple growth throughout the late 80s going into the 90s. Now, that said, there are other open arguments like the whole iPhone versus Android type thing. I know there's the Apple argument saying, well, the Android platform is not open because it requires a jailbreak. Well, that has to do with not understanding the technology and the misuse of words. Jailbreaking is not the same as unlocking. Unlocking is where you essentially attack the carrier of whatever the phone is on, so that you can manipulate that carrier or use that phone for another carrier, like making the iPhone work on T-Mobile or any other GSM carrier out there, right? Jailbreaking has to do more with breaking the software to do more of what you want. Using jailbreaking for the Android is not entirely accurate. The jailbreak, if you want to call it that, is attacking the carrier. It is using Android for root access and inevitably to do what they want with the HTC part of the phone or the Motorola part of the phone or the Nokia part of the phone, whoever the carrier is. That is the point of jailbreaking Android. It's very different from saying, oh, I wish Apple wouldn't have a sandbox here, or I wish Apple didn't have this limitation here within their software. So, while Apple has both flavors of it, the primary jailbreak of Android is going after the carrier itself, the phone itself, to utilize whatever part that is protected between Android and its partners. And I know a lot of the open source communities have problems with Android in that, well, how open is it? Well, Android itself is open up until the part where they have to have legal agreements and partnerships with the phones that they run on, because they have to abide by protecting the intellectual property of HTC that has their own flavor, which they have their little touch sense or what have you, and other phones that like to layer on top of Android their own unique branding. After all, they're trying to say, hey, buy our version of the Android phone versus Motorola's version of the Android, their Android phone. Then, of course, I think a lot of people just get into the personal thing of it. Well, they don't like Steve Jobs or the magic bubble of Steve Jobs. Let's be clear on something. Whether you like Steve Jobs or not, and I tend to be a big Woz fan, Steve Jobs, when he left Apple, did great things. Supported Pixar, Next, which is the fundamental beauty that became, or that is, OS X. Astonishing accomplishments. Whether the magic, and I understand that maybe some of the marketing pisses people off, the magic, it's magical, it does this and that, and many geeks probably feel that, which is another argument, as I digress further in this entire video, that, well, Mac users are just flat out dumb. In my entire computer career, which is spanning 15 years, I know a ton of completely computer savvy users, professionals that are diehard Apple users, and the same exists within Microsoft. If we're to judge just the everyday consumer, why put down the consumer if a consumer really shouldn't be involved in having to worry about Control-Alt-Delete? Oh, just install this driver. Oh, open up your case and put in the memory. When really most users just want to buy the box or the monitor like an iMac and be done with it. But getting back to Steve Jobs, who cannot say that the man has done astonishing things in bringing Apple back from the brink? Now I know, beyond all with, Apple hardware is more expensive and we can do custom builds and all these other things. I have many videos articulating the technical points of things. But in the end, who is anyone to say what a consumer should do and how dare you do and don't do? That's the whole point of the free market, of which I very much enjoy partaking in. And that's why I like to keep my arguments on, well, here's a technology, and now that you know the technology, choose what you would like. So while I will always be a Mac user and defend the technology behind a lot of the good decisions behind Apple, I will also criticize it where The technology is quite simply not magical. And if it is something old, it is going to be old. If it's something Intel's, it's Intel's. If it's DDR3 versus fully buffered memory, or the lack of use of multiprocessing, or the support of multiprocessing. Now I know that the loyalists on either camp, no matter what the company is, will always have their place. And that's the key. I think a fan of anything should have their place and voice their opinion. No matter how ridiculous one may think it is, no matter how ridiculous I may think it is. That's why I like to do responses. But I think that passion, whether you're a Microsoft loyalist, Linux, or some simple database software out there loyalist, or an Apple fanboy, as the popular phrase goes, all of it contributes. Because really, whether you think you're heard, you actually are. That's why there's so much of the arguing going on. That means you are being heard. In a lot of the tech industry, here's you too. Thanks for watching.